You know, those women that you are immediately drawn to because of their light and their love? That is exactly how I feel about our guest today, Arielle Estoria. When she speaks, you listen intently and are left in awe. She's an incredibly gifted spoken word poet. She's a speaker, creative, and body positive model, amongst many other things. And her motto is words not for the ears, but for the soul. Arielle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited for our listeners to truly get a taste of your energy, your light, and your love. I remember the first time I heard Arielle, I was listening to her interview on Paul Fishman's show, and I just burst into tears. I honestly just started crying because they were words that truly hit me in the depths of my soul. And I knew at that point that I had to have her on the show one day for all of you to hear who she is, to experience her magic, to experience the gifts that she has inside of her. I followed her on social media for quite a while now, and I've just so moved every time I read one of her captions or read a post or listen to something she puts out. It's so beautiful. It's so poetic. Arielle, I'm curious. I would love for our listeners to get a little insight into who you are and how you've become this incredibly magnetic woman that you are today, somebody who inspires tens of thousands of people across social media platforms. How did you get to this point?
Yeah. Um, I want to say on accident, but I don't know if that is entirely true. I think a lot of it was just when you find someone who you find is confident or equipped, I think it usually comes from a season of them not being those things. And so I grew up just like super insecure in my own skin and didn't know how to take up space, didn't want to take up too much space, didn't want to be a source of rejection or humiliation. And so I stayed pretty small. I like to say that I was a professional wallflower up until about like middle school, and even a little bit into high school. And then I found theater, I found acting, and I knew how to step into someone else's shoes, and be courageous or bold and vulnerable and open, as them. And then slowly spoken word came into the picture and more of my own personal writing, and then sharing my own life experiences. And that started to open up a confidence in myself that I didn't know was there or could be mine, and ended up flourishing anyway through words and through expression. Yeah, and then it just kind of like trickled from there. So I went to college studying psychology and theater, thinking that I would do art therapy for gifted children. And then that turned into loving college students and maybe wanting to stay there. And then the closer I got to graduating, the more I felt like art and creativity and speaking to these other things were calling me instead. And so I graduated in 2015, and I was like, I'll just take a year, I'll just be a creative for a year. And now that's been almost 6, of doing that full time, in various ways, just like a really, really rocky start, but here we are. And so this is not a life I necessarily sought after, but I do think it is a life that sought after me. And it was just a matter of like finally saying yes and diving into the deep end. Yeah.
And for those who don't know what it means to be a creative, can you explain what that life is?
Yeah. Well, when I first said it, I had no idea what that looked like. I knew I liked acting at the time. I knew I did poetry, so I would speak at my university. I was a resident advisor, so I would speak on different halls for other students as well. I speak at different churches and different events. And so I do these things. In college, you're just like, this is extracurricular. I didn't think that this was something I was going to set out to do as a career after graduating, from a private Christian university. And so when I did graduate, I was just kind of like, I don't know what it means, but I'm going to do it, whatever it is, for a year. And that looks like a lot of different things. It did look like performing at different events in different places, but then it also looked like working, you know, at a coffee shop, and also nannying, and also running errands for people, because being a creative, being an artist is not always financially lucrative, you know. And so finding those loopholes of how to do what I feel like I was called to do and made to do, but then also at the same time pay bills, you know, and eat and live. And so for me, the creativity was a lot of speaking and performing, doing poetry, and then that turned into hosting conferences and things like that as well. Also interlacing poetry into those spaces, and then keynotes started from there. And then social media kind of began to blow up for me a little bit, and that was more around just like, I liked to shop. You know, I had best friends who were photographers, and so I got put in front of the camera a lot. And then I would post those, you know, and then that turned into swimwear brands. Actually, the first brands I started to model, which was like so funny and so groundbreaking for what I needed within my own body. And just kind of like that realization of like, you want me to put a two-piece, you know, like on this body. And so navigating through that. And so yeah, there's like a ton of little pockets when it comes to being creative. I think for me personally, a lot of people are just like, I'm a musician, you know, I'm a singer songwriter, I'm a this, and I'm like, I'm a poet who also does voiceovers, who also acts sometimes, who also likes to do social media storytelling.
Everybody wants them on their podcast.
Yeah, it's like, there's a TED talk on it, and her name is Emily, and I forget her last name, but she has coined the term multi-potentialite. And I really identified with that, because I didn't feel like I had one lane or one space. I'm also an Enneagram 4, so I'm like, you can't contain me, you know, like I'm fluid and I can go anywhere. And so I didn't want just one platform. Like, I loved poetry, I love poetry, I love being on stage, but I also knew I wanted to speak more, you know, I also knew I wanted to write more books. And so just finding the lanes in which I'm like, I like doing that, I'm going to do that, is pretty much what it means, at least for me, to be a creative right now.
Which is so encouraging and inspiring to hear for other women who might relate to your statement of being a quote unquote professional wallflower, to now be, there's no way you can contain all of this. I'm going to pursue all of these different passions. I'm curious,
Right.
what has your journey to self-love and acceptance been like? Have you always been this confident in yourself and your body and who you are?
No, not at all. Like I said earlier, I like grew up, and I was bigger than most of my friends. I lived in a predominantly white area, so everyone was a lot smaller and shorter than I was. And so I kind of felt like an over with all of my friends. I didn't really know how to live and exist in my body, because she was bigger, because she did take up more space. And so I just kind of like hid, literally, and I didn't talk a whole lot. I was super quiet as a kid, even as a teen. And I wore a lot of clothing that just like were baggy and covering, like literally a camouflage skirt that I got from Costco that I like lived in. Like that was, I literally wanted to hide my physical body. And that is kind of like how I was for a really long time, until I found the stage. I feel like there was a permission given to myself to take on someone else's courage and take on someone else's confidence, even though I didn't fully have it for myself. Being able to portray that at first was really powerful for me and really transcendent. And then it turned into, you know, like, oh, going to an arts high school and seeing other people who are different bodies and different skin tones, and weird, you know, how I felt weird. And so there was this solidarity that happened. And then I got to college, and it kind of started all over again freshman year, where I was like, oh, I don't belong here. You know, I don't have friends. Again, hiding a lot. And then stepping into leadership roles on campus and finding my confidence in what I was doing, and less about how I looked or what my body was doing or not doing. It was more so just like, these are the things I'm capable of. Like, these are the abilities I have. And finding confidence in that, and finding friendships through that, and finding spaces where then, you know, learning. But I think the journey of self-love and accepting these bodies we get to call home is a continuous and ever shifting journey. And I don't think we ever reach a point of like, this is who I am, you know, and I don't care. Like, there's always going to be moments where you're like, some days I feel like a potato, you know, and some days I feel like Beyonce, and that's fine. That's like part of the whole journey. And so for me, it was just like a lot of stepping into those roles. But I know I feel the most alive and aware of myself and confident in my skin and what I'm capable of doing when I'm on stage, you know, when I'm writing. And then slowly beginning to learn how to love and accept my body in that process as well. And I did a lot of like experiences in college where I had to extremely step out of my comfort zones, and that allowed me to like find these really gentle moments of like, oh, look what my body is capable of doing, you know, when I said that she wasn't. Look at how strong and powerful she is and how she takes care of me even though I tend to neglect her, you know. And so there's a lot of those moments throughout life where I was just like, oh, this gentle like embrace and this hold for this skin that has always been there and has always been gentle and kind to us, even when we are not the most gentle and kind to it in return. And so yeah, there's always days, and then, you know, finding my now husband and dating him and just the love wrapped up into that, that helped me see my skin a lot differently and see my body in a different light, was so restorative at the same time. So there's a lot of different transitional moments where it was like, oh, there you are, as in like, oh, there's this body that has always been enough, that I believed the lie for too long that she wasn't.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that you said the stage is what brought it out of you. I think that
Mm-hmm.
for most people probably sounds absolutely terrifying to think of finding
Totally.
yourself and, you know, on a stage in front
Yeah,
of people.
totally.
But I think
Yeah.
what's really cool about what you said, and what I often encourage my clients to think about or to give a try, is to look at other people, look at role models that maybe you appreciate something in them, or you really like their flavor of confidence, and
Mm-hmm.
imagine what would it be like to just try it on. What if I
Mm-hmm.
just looked at somebody that I'm inspired by, or that's a role
Yeah.
model, and I just got a sense of her energy, and I feel like this is kind of what you said, is like you allowed yourself to step into this character even if you didn't
Mm-hmm.
fully feel it yet. And I just
Yeah.
think for me in my life, I've done this so many times where I'm inspired by somebody. I'm like, what is it about her or her energy that is magnetic to me? And what if I
Mm-hmm.
tried it? Like, could I try that on for size and see how that
Yeah.
feels to me? So I think that's super beautiful. I love these words from your song Magic. And I was actually going to, I was going to read them, but I thought, why would I read your song from your song Magic? And so I'm wondering, Arielle, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of that song with us. Uh,
Yeah.
the part that I was particularly inspired by was the line that starts with, "This has never been about fitting into this body."
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about believing in your own magic, and that
Mm-hmm.
it's not based on your outer shell. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is something that as women we are trying to embody, we're trying to grapple with.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge in a world that idolizes something that honestly I'm very familiar with, this
Mm-hmm.
thin white privilege.
Yeah.
And for me to be somebody who is doing my best to speak on confidence and to speak on what
Mm-hmm.
that means, my experiences of stepping into confidence are covered and showered
Mm-hmm.
in privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So to to be somebody who comes from a different background than I do,
Yeah.
and recognize it's actually not about your outer shell, because easy for me to say that when the world praises, you know, this privilege that I've been given.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I would love to hear, you know, how you have been able to see the magic within you beyond your outer shell,
Yeah.
and create such beautiful poetry and just step into it in such fullness. Like, I would love to hear your words or to just hear the how for our listeners?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so much of it is like in that wavelength. I've always kind of used the term magic. I've always kind of used the term magic as relating back to people. It fluctuates between like enough-ness, and magic, and that trickling into the phrase black girl magic, and what that means, and what that was held on to. And a lot of it was just realizing, one, magic tends to be a conversation where it's like, oh, that doesn't exist, that's not real. There's a lot of diminishing, there's a lot of gaslighting, there's a lot of just like, oh, but you don't know what you're talking about, there's a lot of you're naive. And those are a lot of conversations that women experience, just in day to day. But that's also a lot of conversation that happens with specifically, Black identifying women, of just like, this is where you can sit, but like anywhere else doesn't really work. And so there was a lot of reclaiming that needed to happen. And so with this phrase in itself of my poem magic, and it was like the words are, there's magic in your bones, and that, coming back to just that line in itself, it has nothing to do with the external, like the bones, or the actual structure of your internal, and of how you're wired and made. And then there's all these beautiful, glorious things put on top of that, like skin and flesh and blood and heartbeats and veins, and you just continue to add onto the magic of the structure of the bones in itself. And then I see there's magic in your eyes, there's magic in your mind, there's magic in you, and there's magic in me. And it's this reminder, we are more than external beings, we are more than just tangible beings, and we are souls, we are hearts. And then to interlace that with a conversation of magic, it's like, no, it's not whimsy or fanatical or unrealistic. It's very real, and it's very much so inside of you, and it's very much so how you were designed and created. And so really coming back to that space and reminding ourselves of the wordiness, of the very intentionality and how we were designed, and that it is a little bit of magic, it is a little bit of, this could not be real in a sense, but we are real, so it is real, the reality of it is real. And kind of wrapping around that conversation as well. And knowing that even, my own privilege of a lighter skin, Black woman, of a smaller plus size woman, and those conversations, like we all can carry our own weight to privilege, but it's also realizing, there is still enoughness in you, there is still magic in you, and there's also enoughness and magic in everyone else at the same time, and knowing that we're carrying those realities very differently. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I try to remind myself that consciously growing in consciousness and growing in conscious maturity is the ability to recognize that we all experience life differently and our realities are all real. They're all valid.
Mhm.
Our experiences are all valid. And
Yeah.
just because my experience has likely been entirely different than your experience, they're both valid and we can hold
Mhm.
space. There's space for all of us.
Yeah.
I think is really powerful. And I think
Yeah.
when we can recognize that each individual has experienced such a different situation, has walked a different path, and when we can see that in ourselves, that whatever I've gone through, whatever I've experienced, it's real and it's valid, but so is her experience. And we don't
Mhm.
have to battle experiences, but each of our lives are testimonies, they're stories, and we can
Mhm.
use those for good, and we can, or they can be used in unhelpful ways. But I think
Yeah.
for me, it's reminding myself that, um, that my story is worthy of being shared
Mhm.
just as yours is, just as another woman's is. And I love this idea of we are all enough.
Mm.
Curious, where did your ability to trust God, your intuition come from to be able to push through your fear and always share your truth?
Yeah. Um, I grew up as a faith-based person. Like my dad is a pastor, and so I've always been around this concept and idea that there's more, there's more to this world, there's more to us, there's a bigger story being told here with the thread of humanity, and we're part of it. And a lot of that, I mean, has like shifted and changed in a lot of different ways, but it mostly just came from this concept of discernment and knowing that there's this gut part of me that orchestrates and moves around my decisions and the things, that I feel comfortable or don't feel comfortable doing, and so I'm a very feeler person. I'm a very I'm sensitive to everything person, and I believe there's a spirit and a tone of spirituality to a lot, just because I tangibly will feel it and experience it. And so whether it's music, whether it's, being at a park, and I'm like, the trees are moving and I get like goosebumps, and it's just this constant reminder of like, oh my gosh, we're part of so much. We're part of something so big and so beautiful. And that has definitely changed, because specifically Christianity has not always been the most beautiful place where it resonates that women can trust themselves, and that women can trust what Glennon Doyle calls the knowing inside of them, or the divine inside of them, or the sacred inside of them. And so that has definitely shifted a lot, but I have always come back to there is something bigger, and if I call that something bigger God, then that's what I'm gonna call it, and that there's a connection of spirituality and our breath to the way the trees move, to the way the waves come in and out, to the way that birds fly. Like it's everywhere, and I can't help but see it, but experience it, and feel it, and thus be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say to the woman who wants to adopt some of this energy, some of this boldness that you have, but
Mm.
currently subscribes to society's idea that you need to be a nice girl, not take up too much time or space, and remember your
Mm.
place?
Yeah, I think I posted this recently because I was listening to Brene Brown's podcast, and she was interviewing Alicia Keys, and she recently released a memoir novel, and one of the things they talked about was death to the good girl, and how trapping and that conversation could be of like, sit down, be still, be quiet, don't do too much, don't show up, where you're not supposed to show up, cross your legs, put the dress on, be a good girl. And a lot of us have been really trapped by that narrative, and a lot of us have been really limited by that narrative, because there's still a conditioning that happens with that conversation. There's still something of smallness that we're pushed into that conversation. And so to be a good girl, we have applied as synonymous as, okay, be small, don't show up too big in this world, don't put all that I know I've been gifted and created with at the table. You can't do that. And so what we're experiencing now is when women step into boldness, when women step into a fierceness and awareness of who they are breaking that conditioning. They are not only breaking that conditioning for themselves, but they're also spearheading a path for the women who will come after them and before them and with them. And so there's this conversation of, either death to the good girl, or just to the smallness or the boxes that we've been placed in. And I think that is a very beautiful thing. I think it's a very necessary thing, because what we're noticing and what we're seeing is a lot of women who are stepping into their fullness, and thus into their freedom, and kind of breaking the chains for other women as well. And I think that was the whole reason of the conditioning, you know, of the smallness, is to hinder that, because women are powerful. And I don't think it's a coincidence, you know, that we've been made to be convinced and lied to of our smallness or our inadequacies, because it's like, let's keep them in this mindset, because if we can get them to forget who they are and whose they are, then they won't do what they're called to do in this world. But once you just like one little unlocking, you know, like one little permission to not have to say yes to everyone, to not have to be small, it gives this, like, you know, almost this little flame of something, and it grows. It has to grow, you know.
And it's
Yeah.
so contagious. I feel like when I see somebody showing up in their fullness, it's just this contagious feeling. It's this magnetic feeling that maybe I can show up a little bit more in my fullness. Maybe it's safe to be fully who I am and who I'm meant to be and what my purpose is. And I think as women, or at least myself, I've dealt with this fear that if I show up in all my fullness and it's, you know, maybe other people won't like it, or maybe I'm playing too big, or maybe it's going to trigger other people. And what I'm constantly reminded is that the more I embody who I am, all that I am, all that I'm not, my quirkiness, my weird sides, the parts of me that I've written off as silly, when I just embrace those and I allow myself to be this multidimensional human being, it invites real, authentic relationships into my life. And what's so cool is I just feel like it's this ripple effect of women showing up in their fullness. And so when we do that, it's like we grant other people the permission, or at least it's like passing off some courage to somebody else to say, hey, like, I know it's scary to be fully you, but look at me being fully me. And hey, some people are going to like it and some people aren't, but the right people are going to come into our lives when we embrace all that we are. And I feel like that's exactly what you do, is at least the energy and the vibe I've gotten from listening to your stuff and watching you on social media, is that you just embrace who you are in its fullness. And it makes me feel like, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And I think that's, you know, it's really so powerful. I've seen others call you a professional feeler. How have you had the courage to tap into your emotions deeply? I know this is very scary for a lot of people to fully feel all of their emotions. How do you do that?
So I don't know if I am the best person to answer this, only because I don't know how not to feel. Even like as a teenager, like I would be the kid who's like laying on my bedroom floor with like the lights off, like listening to John Mayer's Dreaming with a Broken Heart on repeat. Or there was like this one, I don't even know if it was So You Think You Can Dance or what, but there's this one dance couple who danced to that song on this bed with roses, and it was heartbreaking and beautiful, and I would watch it on loop and just like weep, you know. So I feel everything. I can't help it. I don't know how not to. Like, even when I do try to turn it on, it just turns into just like a volcano, you know, because I didn't turn it off at all. I just suppressed it, you know. And so I think that what happens first and foremost is a lot of what we were talking about in terms of the conditioning of, especially as women, you're too emotional, you know, you feel too much, and so we suppress those parts of us that are natural to feel. And so I always say, like, a lot of times I'll do sets or I'll do poems and people will cry, you know, and I used to apologize for making them cry, and I stopped doing that because I think what it did was some part of what I said or what you heard tapped into a deeper part of who you are, and thus created this like healing, and thus created this like outpouring. And I think that's beautiful and necessary. And so I started to say, oh my gosh, thank you so much for letting me be part of your healing. You know, it wasn't that I wanted to apologize for making them cry, because I realized that was on purpose. There's a reason that they needed to flow those things out. And usually it becomes a suppressing, is that you, for some some reason we don't feel like we can feel and feel deeply. And there is a time and a space, of course, for all things. But I think the most beautiful part of who we are and what makes us human is our ability to feel and sympathize and empathize. And when we hinder those things, I truly do think we hinder ourselves from experiencing the fullness of being human. And so I'm all about the feels. I think feeling and feeling deeply is important. And so if I ever like teach or do writing workshops, like someone will probably cry, and that is just a part of the work that we're doing. And that is something that I have wanted to intentionally create spaces for people to feel and feel deeply, and to walk away feeling more seen and more known than when they stepped into the room. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Do you have any poems that you would be interested in sharing with us?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about magic, but I didn't realize I kind of went into like a whole different tangent about it. But I feel like it makes more sense to actually do the poem. But yeah, there's
It's
magic.
beautiful. If you've never heard it, you guys, it is so beautiful. It is unreal. It'd be such a gift to hear, Arielle.
Thank you. There's magic in your bones. There's magic in your eyes. There's magic swimming all around in your mind. There's magic in you. There's magic in me. There's magic in us. If only we believe. I am 1/3 poet. I am 2/4 perfectionist. I'm imperfect, chaotic, frazzled, and indecisive. I can be moody and negative, self-deprecating and hypocritical. I advocate for the beauty and importance of everyone else. And I sometimes deny my own. I am often thinking that I won't measure up. I won't achieve any other level of success. Most days I feel like a fraud. Like people will look behind my curtain and find a mess of a woman, and they will not love me like still. I love like still. Like ocean always coming back to shore, simply hoping to be loved in return. I'm in love for the first time in my life, and it is terrifying and beautiful all at once. I am becoming, slowly unwinding into who I've always been meant to be. It's like meeting a distant and yet longed for piece of you that has always reminded you of home. I am home to one too many emotions, to fantasies and dreams that seem as realistic as fairy dust. I sometimes still believe in magic. Hope that it is tucked in the wings of a butterfly, or maybe in the dimples of a really chunky baby, in the colors of a sunset, or the way that he looks at me. And they may call me something like foolish. 28 years old and still believing in magic. But what if the thing we're most afraid of is not that it doesn't exist, but that it's lived inside of us all this time and we called it foolish? Okay, well, call me foolish, because I could see it swimming in my veins. And every time I take a breath, magic tucked on the tip of this tongue. It is no wonder why these words are sometimes the most necessary healing I've come to know. So call us magic, because I could see it swimming in your veins. And every time you take a breath, magic tucked into your very existence, so much so that your breath is a miracle. And you are a miracle. There's magic in your bones. There's magic in your eyes. There's magic swimming all around in your mind. There's magic in you. There's magic in me. There's magic in us. If only we believe.
Thank you. What a gift. What a gift, Arielle. Thank you so much. I was like, okay, don't burst, don't burst into tears. Seriously, wow. Like that's incredible to have that gift, to be able to just shower that on other people for them to feel something.
Mm.
I think sometimes we are asleep in our lives And to hear something like that just wakes the soul up in a way that I think so many of us need. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
Absolutely beautiful. That's also available on Spotify, correct?
Yeah,
Um,
and
as well.
iTunes. It's pretty much on any streaming platform that you listen to things on. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some really beautiful just music behind it too. It's beautiful. Go look it up. Magic is the title by Arielle
Mhm.
Estoria. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing your light and your love. If people land on your page or they land on this podcast, what is the thing that you hope for the woman that's listening to this, if she takes away one nugget, what do you hope that she takes with her?
Yeah, I think it's less about what I said. I feel like as an artist, if I go on stage and people only saw my outfit, or experienced me in my physical sense, but didn't actually like hear what I said, or what I said didn't resonate deeper, then I don't feel like I'm doing my job as an artist, as a speaker, as a words person. And so I hope that there is a deep well part of you that is now filled up. I hope that there is something not only restored and healed inside of you, but also bursted wide open. Um, that reminds you and keeps you more in tune of who you are, of how you were designed, and how you're able to show up in this world. Yeah, and that you realize legacy is something like leaving trails of magic and glitter behind you, when there's no more life in your veins and breath in your body, that you still leave beautiful things behind, just by existing. And so, yeah, I think that is something that I want people to remember.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for gifting us your time, your energy, your light, and your love. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I know you will want to experience more of Arielle. She is on Instagram. I will put her handle and the link in my bio. And very exciting, as of today, the day that you're listening to this podcast, she has released new merch, t-shirts, books, and it's all going to be on her website, arielleestoria.com. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If this episode moved you, if she moved you, would you send us a DM? Let us know, share it on social media so that we can hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. We will catch you in the next episode.